In 1969, an 11-year-old girl named Amber Collins vanished on her way to the library in Alpena, Michigan, disappearing without a trace and leaving her family devastated for decades. Authorities once suspected a man living near the Ottawa National Forest might be involved, but with no body found, no clear physical evidence, and the investigation gradually stalling. Yet through all those years, Michigan's cold case investigators never gave up, clinging to the faint hope that the truth was still out there, unseen. Then one day, while re-examining a small piece of evidence overlooked since 1969, they discovered a detail that everyone had missed for decades, a detail powerful enough to turn the entire case upside down and shock everyone involved. Before we dive deeper into this seemingly impossible story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe to support the channel. Alpena, Michigan, on a summer morning unfolded in the gentle light typical of the Lake Huron region. Early sunshine, softly spreading over wooden rooftops, the scent of damp grass and pine resin lingering in the air, the dirt roads along the edge of town, covered in a pale golden dust that caught the light. It was the kind of morning when everyone assumed nothing unusual could happen. As the small grocery store began to open, the sound of ship horns echoed from the distant harbor, and flocks of sparrows gathered on the power lines like a familiar town ritual. Amber Collins, the 11-year-old girl with soft brown hair and a habit of always tucking a book under her arm, stepped out of her pale gray wooden house and turned onto the familiar dirt road leading to the local library. It was a journey she made almost every morning throughout summer vacation, peaceful, quiet, never causing anyone to worry. As Amber passed the house at the end of the street, the woman watering her garden paused to avoid splashing her. She later said that the image of Amber passing by in the weak sunlight, head slightly bowed, steady steps, book tucked under her arm, became the most haunting moment of her life, because it was the last time Amber appeared as a normal part of the neighborhood. A carpenter, arranging planks in the lot next door, also happened to see Amber on the dirt road before she entered the line of trees, forming a path that ran deeper toward town. He only remembered that she was walking fairly quickly, looking focused as if thinking about something in the book she was carrying. No one realized that was the last moment they saw her. Noon arrived like any other day, the sunlight stronger now, the sound of small trucks along the forest edge, but when the family returned home after the morning's work and called for Amber, there was no answer. At first it was just mild surprise. Amber usually came home on time. They checked the backyard, calling her name loudly. No trace. They went to the nearest neighbor's house, then a few more, and everyone gave the same answer: no one had seen Amber return. The porch empty, the wooden chair where she often sat reading still untouched, the back door slightly ajar as always, but showing no unusual signs. With each passing minute, the silence in the house grew heavier. Unease began to spread, at first just a vague feeling that Amber was lingering somewhere, then gradually turning into the sense that something was completely out of character for her daily routine. Amber wasn't the type of child who got lost in play and forgot the time. She always told her mother where she was going, always kept the same schedule every morning, always left some small sign that she had come home. But this time, there was none. The streets around the neighborhood, usually so quiet, suddenly felt vast and strange, as if Amber had stepped into some unseen void. All the usual explanations were quickly ruled out. Once the family had checked every corner, every bush, every familiar spot in the yard, the worry turned into real fear, the fear that Amber could no longer return on her own. Standing by the phone, they knew this moment could not be delayed. The family decided to call the police, officially launching a search they had no idea would last more than half a century. In the minutes after the call was made, the quiet neighborhood in Alpena quickly changed atmosphere. The first Michigan State Police patrol car rolled onto the dirt road leading to the Collins home, the crunch of gravel under the tires breaking the familiar silence of the small residential area. Two officers stepped out, briefly spoke with the family, and immediately initiated the protocol for handling a missing minor in the critical early hours, when any mistake could cause a vital clue to disappear forever. There was no hesitation, no wait and see if she comes back on her own phase. Upon hearing the family describe Amber's personality and habits, how she was always on time and never went anywhere without telling someone. The officers immediately understood this was not a typical runaway child case. The initial investigative steps were taken right in the front yard, reconstructing the direction Amber left the house, confirming she had walked along the dirt road toward the library, and then continuing to trace the possible route of an 11-year-old child. A topographic map of the area was spread out on the hood of the car, marked with red crayon on the trails, side paths, sparse woods, open lots, and interconnected residential areas forming a network. The lead officer pointed to 3 paths Amber might have taken to continue, all leading to areas with poor visibility. To avoid wasting more time, 2 additional officers were dispatched immediately to take statements from those who had seen the girl. The woman watering her garden was interviewed first. She recalled Amber passing by with a normal demeanor, no one following behind, no unusual behavior. The statement was clear, certain, with no signs of hesitation, but the information only helped confirm the starting point and didn't explain what happened afterward. The second witness was the carpenter working near the lot. He said he only caught a glimpse of Amber, with no one accompanying her. When asked how far he was from her, he estimated over 100 feet, far enough that he wouldn't have heard any sounds or conversation, if there had been any. This created a significant gap. If someone had approached Amber right after he turned back inside, no one would have heard anything. The third witness introduced an anomaly. A man living at the end of the dirt road said he thought he saw Amber stop at the fork, but the more details he was asked for, the more inconsistent his statement became, sometimes saying she was standing alone, other times mentioning a tall figure in the distance. Police noted unstable next to it, but still incorporated the statement into the timeline for cross-reference. When all the statements were laid out side by side, the MSP officers realized something alarming. Amber's journey could be clearly traced up to the trail, but from that point onward, a time gap appeared, a stretch with absolutely no witnesses seeing anything, no one hearing footsteps or calls, no sign of Amber continuing forward or turning back. It was a brief few minutes, but precisely where the incident shifted from normal to abnormal. The investigation team returned to the trail where Amber was last seen for a more thorough sweep. Under the harsher midday sun, the ground revealed every shoe print, tire track, animal mark, and countless other small traces, typical of a forest bordering a residential area. They weren't allowed to jump to conclusions, but one detail began triggering the officers' experienced instincts. On the dirt there was a lightly disturbed area, as if someone had stood in one spot for a long time. Not enough to conclude anything, but enough that it couldn't be ignored. And more importantly, that disturbance didn't match any of the locations provided by witnesses. "This isn't the footprint of an 11-year-old out for a stroll," one officer muttered, eyes still fixed on the ground. No one confirmed anything, but the investigative atmosphere had completely changed. It was no longer about finding a child lost in play, but determining how Amber had vanished into that gap. Notes were hastily scribbled on the clipboard: time gap, disturbed soil location, witness 3 unstable. Everything was starting to take shape, a shape that no one in this small town wanted to face directly. In less than an hour from when the investigation team arrived, the case had shifted from concern to suspicion. Amber hadn't simply gotten lost. Something about this stretch of road didn't fit with her routine. And that was the moment the Michigan State Police decided to expand the investigation, instead of continuing to hope she would return on her own, like other children. The search had officially become a missing person investigation. The dirt road where Amber was last seen still retained its inherent peaceful appearance, but through the eyes of experienced investigators, every blade of grass, every patch of soil, every disturbance could be a message left from the moment the girl vanished. After collecting witness statements and mapping out the probable route of an 11-year-old child, the Michigan State Police team began sweeping the entire path using a process of elimination, following the exact route Amber might have taken, stopping at all locations with poor visibility, and marking any section of ground that didn't match the witnesses' descriptions. They proceeded slowly, cautiously, overlooking no sign however small. Several officers knelt close to the ground, using specialized flashlights to examine the soil structure, direction of compression, and depth of indentations. At first, Most of the surface only showed familiar animal tracks from the forested area: deer, squirrels, rabbits, but as they moved deeper toward the line of trees where Amber's figure was last seen, the signs began to change. A small footprint was found along the edge of the trail, with a size relatively matching children's shoes. There was nothing unusual about that footprint itself, but what caught the investigators' attention was how it was placed off from the others. Instead of pointing straight toward the library, this footprint veered slightly to the left, heading into an area that witnesses hadn't mentioned in their statements. Following that deviated direction, one officer discovered lightly disturbed soil, forming an unusual depressed patch, not large, but enough to indicate a sudden stop or some forceful contact with the ground. This area was not far from the point where the second witness had seen Amber, and from this position, the view from the main road was completely obscured by tree trunks and tall brush. A child standing here could be hidden from sight in just a few seconds. Police continued to examine the depressed patch more closely. There were some small shallow skid marks with no clear direction. It couldn't be confirmed as drag marks, but they didn't resemble ordinary walking footprints either. One officer used a probe to check the depth and soil texture, noting that this section was softer than the surrounding area, as if the weight of two bodies had impacted the same spot. Notes were written immediately: disturbance, multiple force impacts, inconsistent with natural child movement. Continuing along the trail, a larger footprint appeared faintly at the edge of the soil, a few steps from the small one. The size and stride length suggested it was an adult's footprint, but the anomaly was it appeared as just one single print, with no following mark, as if the person had taken only one step and then vanished from the ground. This raised multiple possibilities, none of which made the police feel at ease. One officer reconstructed Amber's direction of travel, comparing it to the position of the large footprint and the disturbed area. When connecting these 3 points, the scene formed a small fan-shaped triangle, with Amber at the center, and the adult on the side opposite to the direction she was heading. Meaning, if Amber had continued along her original path, the adult footprint should have appeared behind her, not in the opposing direction, but it was in front, blocking the way she was going. This led to the first hypothesis in the case: Amber did not simply continue her journey to the library, she had stopped because someone appeared in front of her, and it was highly likely that this person approached Amber in a way that prevented any strong resistance from her. When analyzing the disturbed area, police noted the soil was compressed in 2 directions, one small and light, possibly Amber's, one stronger and broader, possibly the adult's. The uneven compression suggested someone either suddenly stood close to Amber, or bent down with significant force. Not enough basis for a conclusion, but the ground signs didn't match a scenario of Amber running, jumping or falling. Investigative files had recorded many patterns from cases of children being dragged or forced to move, and this area, though not sufficient for 100% certainty, showed notable similarities. An even more important point: the route Amber took daily was a familiar path, with no reason for her to veer into a concealed area, unless someone familiar appeared on the road, or something caught her attention. When the preliminary report was compiled, the lead investigator marked the disturbed area with wooden stakes and yellow tape, cordoning it off as a priority suspicious point. No definitive conclusions were drawn at that time, but within the investigation team, a deduction began to be whispered: if these traces were real, Amber Collins had likely been approached by an adult right at the last point witnesses saw her, and from there, the girl disappeared from the world without leaving a single cry. The silence of the sparse forest made that hypothesis all the more terrifying. When the disturbed area on the ground was marked and included in the initial scene report, the Michigan State Police decided to return to the most fundamental investigative step: cross-referencing the statements of those who saw Amber before she vanished. Because in every child missing person case, especially one without clear physical evidence, witnesses are the vital lifeline of information. But the deeper the team delved, the more they realized that what they had did not form a unified flow. Instead, it was like 3 puzzle pieces that didn't fit into the same picture. Witness A was the most cooperative. She was the woman watering her garden, and her statement remained consistent from beginning to end. She said Amber was walking alone, no one following behind, no turning back, no unusual behavior. She remembered it clearly because Amber had smiled and greeted her as she passed the lavender fence, a detail consistent across all 3 times she was questioned. When police asked if she heard a second set of footsteps or a slow-moving vehicle, she firmly said no. The dirt road that morning was so quiet, she could hear the water from the hose hitting the soil. Witness A's statement thus became the most reliable anchor point in Amber's timeline. Witness B, the carpenter working on the lot, offered a slightly different story. He remembered seeing Amber from a distance, yes, but when pressed for more details, he added that it seemed she had stopped on the trail and tilted her head slightly, as if listening to someone speaking. At first, this was just a vague detail, but when police asked him to describe the exact angle she was standing, the position of her hands, the distance between her and the person he thought she was talking to, he began to falter. In the first interview, he said he saw no one else. In the next, he said there might have been a tall figure at the edge of his vision, behind a large tree trunk, but when police returned for a third interview, he changed his tone, saying there probably wasn't anyone. Maybe I missaw because the sun was in my eyes. The loose, inconsistent statement and the shifting attitude led police to wonder, what had he actually seen, or was he trying to conceal part of his memory? Witness C was troubling in an entirely different way. He was the man living at the end of the dirt road, not far from where Amber passed, and he should have had a clear view of the girl if he was standing on his porch as he initially claimed. But as soon as police mentioned the specific time Amber was last seen, he became guarded and reluctant to talk much. He answered slowly, in fragments, and whenever asked for details, he visibly evaded. Even when questioned about whether he saw any adults in the area, he replied, "I'm not sure what I should say." That was the statement that caused the entire investigation team to immediately underline it in red in the file. A witness unsure of what he should say is not someone who doesn't know, it's someone who knows something but is hesitating. That hesitation could stem from fear, guilt, or direct involvement. All 3 possibilities put the police on high alert. From that moment, Witness C was no longer treated as a neutral source of information. He became someone to monitor closely. When the investigation team laid out statements A, B, and C side by side, they discovered a major issue. No 2 statements fully matched. A said Amber was walking alone. B said Amber stopped and may have been talking to someone. C evaded entirely. In real investigations, discrepant statements are not uncommon, but 3 statements diverging in 3 different directions was noteworthy. This led police to formulate a significant hypothesis: someone knew more than they were saying. One officer noted in the record, "This inconsistency is not random. There is a possibility that someone is deliberately concealing information, or at least trying to avoid involvement." When the lead investigator reviewed every word again, he highlighted a concept he called social suspect, a term used to describe individuals who are not direct suspects, but whose behavior, attitude, or statements are abnormal enough that they may be protecting someone or hiding a critical detail. Witnesses B and C immediately fell into this category, but of the 2, only one seemed truly dangerous. B, despite changing statements, did not evade. He may have simply misremembered or been psychologically affected by the noise of his saw preventing him from hearing clearly. Witness C was different. The fear in his eyes was nothing like mere confusion. Police noted in the internal report that he reacted like someone with indirect involvement, or who had witnessed something he did not want to relive. When the analysis team cross-referenced the statements with the disturbed area on the ground, one detail became clearer. If Witness B's account of Amber stopping was accurate, the disturbed area matched that location perfectly. But if Witness A's account was correct, that Amber never stopped, then what caused the soil to be compressed so heavily? The contradiction was not only in the words of the residents, it had appeared right beneath their feet, on the soil of Alpena. Police understood they had entered a different phase of the missing person case, no longer just finding where Amber went, but finding who had stood near her in those final minutes, and more importantly, why someone would want to conceal it. As the discrepant witness statements began creating suspicious gaps on the analysis map, The Michigan State Police understood that they could no longer rely solely on surface observations of the dirt road. If Amber had been approached by someone, and if the disturbed soil was indeed a sign of an unwanted encounter, then part of the incident had taken place in the sparse forest bordering the back of the trail. And the most dangerous aspect was the alpena forest to the east, stretched for miles, connected by hard-to-spot side paths, small animal trails, and low-lying ground that could completely conceal human footprints. So, as the last sunlight of the afternoon faded, the investigation team concentrated their forces to prepare for the most critical phase of the first day, a nighttime forest sweep. High-powered handheld flashlights, specialized halogen lights, and wide-angle illumination equipment were distributed to each group. They divided the map into grid sections, assigning each unit responsibility for one area to minimize the chance of missing anything. The officers entered the forest at a slow but tense pace, knowing that if Amber was still nearby, this was the moment she most needed to be found. Darkness gradually enveloped the tree trunks, leaving the ground illuminated by moving streaks of silvery white from the sweeping lights. One officer used neon cord to mark the path, ensuring the team behind followed the exact route. The crunch of dry leaves underfoot sounded louder than usual, enough to make any strange noise immediately noticed. But the alpena forest that night was almost completely silent, a silence that experienced investigators always regarded as an ominous sign. When the K-9 unit was brought in, hopes rose. The service dogs were specially trained to search for living people, injured individuals, or objects carrying human scent. The handler let them thoroughly sniff Amber's clothing, then released them to lead the way. One dog named Ranger immediately pulled hard on the leash, heading toward the northeast section of the forest, where the ground disturbance was located. Ranger sniffed around that area in a few short circles, then seemed to pick up a scent on the ground. It bolted along a diagonal path, running quickly but steadily, forcing the two officers to speed up to keep pace. Upon reaching a large tree trunk, Ranger stopped, barked once shortly, then veered in another direction, following the scent trail deeper into the forest. Everyone in the investigation group immediately noted this point, marking it as one of the locations where Amber might have stopped or been taken through. Ranger continued leading for nearly 100 meters, the scent still strong, until it suddenly lost the trail in a more open area where the trees thinned and the ground was harder. The handler tried to reintroduce the scent, having Ranger circle the area in a wide radius, but the dog turned back toward a nearby side road, wagging its tail as if to indicate the scent had been abruptly cut off. When two more dogs were brought in, both repeated the same pattern, leading the team to the ground disturbance, heading northeast, then losing the scent at the exact same spot, a spot where a dirt road leading out of the forest was only a few dozen meters away. One officer knelt to re-examine the soil structure where the scent was lost, noting that the ground here was hard and compacted, unlike the softer soil in areas frequently walked on. But the most noteworthy thing was there were no clear footprints, no drag marks, no tire tracks, as if whoever took Amber had chosen the exact direction, route and hard enough ground to leave no traces. One investigator wrote in the report, "The entire route indicated by the K-9 matches the direction away from town. This suggests Amber did not enter the forest on her own. She was carried away." This was the first time in the case that police agreed Amber had most likely been removed from the area by another person, rather than getting lost in the woods. The investigative procedure immediately shifted, no longer a short-range search for a missing child, but a consideration of the entire surrounding town area, trails leading to major roads, and the possibility that Amber had been put into a vehicle at a location outside witness sightlines. The officers reconstructed the route map the K-9 had followed, a straight segment, then a curve, then an abrupt stop. When overlaying this map on the full regional topographic map, the first thing that struck the investigation team was the distance from the scent loss point to an old highway-connected side dirt road. If someone wanted to take a child out of Alpena without being noticed, this was the ideal spot. No homes, no clear lines of sight from the neighborhood, trees on both sides concealing nearly the entire area. One officer said quietly while looking at the map, "If this is the path the perpetrator chose, then he knows this area too well." That statement inadvertently pushed the investigation team toward a completely new assumption. Amber may have been taken by someone familiar with the Alpena terrain, or even someone living right in the area. The first night ended with no direct trace of Amber, but with a new reality clearer than before. The 11-year-old girl did not vanish on her own. She had left the trail in a direction no one expected, and not on her own 2 feet. The next morning, as the thin sunlight of Alpena filtered gently through the tree canopy and shone down on the forest still bearing the marks of the previous night's search footsteps, the investigation team returned to the point where the canines had lost the scent. The night had given them a new direction. Amber had not wandered off on her own, but had been taken northeast. But to turn the hypothesis into evidence, they needed something physical, a tangible sign, no matter how small, to confirm that human intervention had interrupted the 11-year-old girl's journey. Right in the hard-packed area, where the dogs had stopped, a young officer named McAllister discovered something that made the entire team pause to examine it. It was not clothing, not one of Amber's personal belongings, nor anything that directly suggested the girl. It was just a small piece of paper, almost buried under a layer of soil and dry pine needles, with one corner curled and stuck with a bit of tree sap. On the surface, it was nothing special, just a small torn fragment from a local grocery store receipt. But what made McAllister frown was its location, only a few steps from the point where the canines lost the scent. A child rarely had reason to carry a receipt into the woods, an 11-year-old even less so. And more importantly, the piece of paper was fresh, with no signs of rotting or faded ink. It could not have been there longer than 1 or 2 days, meaning it appeared at a time coinciding with Amber's disappearance. When the investigation team collected the piece of paper and used tweezers to place it into an evidence bag, they were able to read the faint printed text on the remaining portion: Parker's General Store, Maple Road. This was not a store on Amber's route to the library. It was nearly a mile from the main road, in a completely opposite direction. This immediately raised the question, why would a receipt from an unrelated store appear right in the area where Amber might have been taken through? Had the person who took Amber passed by there, or had the paper fallen when someone was waiting in the shadows of the trees? When 2 investigators were sent to Parker's store to verify, they discovered something even more interesting. The receipt belonged to a transaction made on the morning Amber vanished. The timestamp on the receipt, though not publicly detailed, fell within the window the team had determined for when Amber was approached. The receipt listed a few simple items: coffee, a newspaper and a box of nails. Nothing related to children, but its appearance in the key area forced police to re-examine the entire list of people present at Parker's that day. Word spread quickly, and within an hour, a list of 8 potential customers was compiled. Some were familiar local residents with clear alibis, but 2 remaining names were flagged for further checking because they had been seen near the forest on the day Amber went missing. The piece of paper itself was not direct evidence of a crime, but it opened up an entirely new network of people moving through the area, a network police had not previously considered, because they had focused heavily on the trail Amber took daily. This clue thus became a critical catalyst. It forced the investigation team to consider the possibility that someone had been waiting in the forest, or at least that someone had used this route as a transfer point after leaving Parker's. This expanded the suspect pool, no longer just those living near Amber's usual road, but also anyone who might have gone through Parker's and then veered into the northeast forest. From an investigative standpoint, the very lack of obvious connection of the paper made it valuable. It was the only human trace left in an area where the perpetrator seemed very careful to avoid leaving footprints. However, amid the focus pouring into the Parker's receipt, a veteran older officer, who had worked many missing persons cases in Michigan's forests, reminded his younger colleague, "Things that appear too perfectly timed are often not the ones that lead you to the truth." That warning was temporarily overlooked because the team desperately needed anything to break the deadlock, but it would become the most memorable statement of the initial investigation phase. A crucial detail was discovered shortly afterward. When the team re-swept the area where the paper was found, the ground showed absolutely no signs of someone stopping to read or hold the receipt. No standing marks, no kneeling marks, no trampling, no soil compression consistent with someone accidentally dropping it. The piece of paper lay there as if it had been placed, not fallen. Even the wind direction that day could not explain why it ended up neatly at the exact spot where the canines lost the scent, rather than being blown into the brush. All these anomalies created the sense of a staged clue, but with no direct evidence to refute it, police still had to treat it as a new investigative lead. Many years later, when the case was reopened, investigators would confirm what the veteran officer had predicted. The Parker's receipt fragment was a deliberate red herring, an attempt to divert law enforcement resources toward the Northeast instead of the perpetrator's actual route. But in 1969, the Michigan State Police could not know that. They only knew that for the first time since Amber vanished, they held a piece of physical evidence in their hands, and any evidence was enough to make them shift their investigative strategy. A small clue appearing on the edge of the Alpena forest had begun to influence the entire case. And like every other missing person case, false leads are often the ones that steer the investigation furthest from the right path. While the investigation team was still debating the Parker's receipt fragment, whether it was a genuine clue or an unbelievable coincidence, a new piece of information emerged, shifting the entire focus of the Michigan State Police to a completely different target: a green pickup truck seen stopping unusually near the trail where Amber vanished. This information came from a man living on the edge of the forest, less than 2 blocks from where the canines lost the scent. He said that on the morning Amber disappeared, while taking out the trash to the road, he saw the green pickup stopped at the turnoff leading into the forest, engine running but not moving. The driver was a man in his early 40s or older, wearing a baseball cap, constantly looking toward the trail as if waiting for someone. At first, this statement was considered secondary, since many Alpena residents owned pickup trucks, and green was not uncommon. But when placed alongside the signs the team had already collected, the disturbed soil, the single adult footprint that appeared and then vanished, and the possibility that Amber had been taken out of the forest northeast, this detail about the truck became significant. Because if someone was waiting, the perfect stopping point was exactly the side road where the green pickup had appeared. When the informant described it further, he recalled that the truck had stayed there quite a long time, long enough for him to take the trash inside, wash his hands, and come back out to still see the vehicle unmoved. This prompted police to immediately bring the information into the afternoon field briefing. One officer on the team remembered seeing a similar pickup parked outside Parker's General Store early in the morning, a few weeks earlier. Just a small recollection, but enough to push the investigation team to the next step: tracking down the truck. Alpena in 1969 had far more pickup trucks than passenger cars, but not many matched the exact description: old green bed slightly dented, left fender with a minor crease. It took less than 4 hours for police to locate the truck parked in front of the garage of a small house a few miles outside town. The owner was a man named Roy Fowler, 42 years old, a freelance welder and plumber. He lived alone, rarely interacted with neighbors, and according to locals, he had a habit of driving aimlessly early in the morning. When police knocked on the door, Fowler appeared calmer than necessary. He denied any involvement in the disappearance, saying he had been home that morning, fixing a kitchen cabinet, and only went out after noon to buy supplies. This sounded reasonable enough, but when police asked if he had driven to the forest area near the trail, Fowler answered too quickly and unnaturally, "No, I never go there." That was the first contradiction, because according to the informant, a truck identical to Fowler's had been parked there during the exact time frame of Amber's disappearance. Police asked him to describe the cabinet repair, and he could, but he couldn't name the store where he bought supplies that afternoon. When asked to produce the receipt to confirm the timing, Fowler hesitated. "I threw it away." The second contradiction emerged when police asked if he had seen Amber that morning. Fowler paused a second too long, then said, "No, I don't notice kids." An innocent person usually answers faster. Someone involved often needs a beat to weigh whether the truth or a lie is safer. Police noted immediately, Fowler evasive, defensive reaction. To check the alibi, police interviewed a few people around town, hoping to find someone who had actually seen Fowler at home during the time he claimed. But no one could confirm it. One neighbor said he often left the house very early, sometimes before sunrise. Another said they often noticed Fowler's truck wasn't parked in front of the house in the mornings, but didn't note specific times. When police asked Fowler again if he could prove he was home at the time Amber vanished, he shrugged. "No one visits me, so no one knows. But I'm telling the truth." That was when the alibi officially began to crumble. No confirmation, no receipt, no witnesses, no evidence to support his statement. Meanwhile, the witness statement about the green truck stopping unusually matched the direction of travel the K9C had indicated. Under the pressure of the situation, police requested to search the truck. Fowler hesitated for a moment, but ultimately agreed. His consent reduced some of the initial suspicion, but did not eliminate it entirely. Inside the truck there were no obvious traces of children's items, no fabric fibers or objects directly linked to Amber. But one thing caught the investigation team's attention. In the truck bed there was a streak of dark soil, unlike the dirt in the neighborhood, and similar to the type found at the turnoff where the truck was seen. This soil was higher in moisture, reddish-brown, characteristic of the low ground inside the Alpena forest. Fowler's inability to explain this soil streak caused suspicion to rise again. When police asked why his truck was parked at the trail entrance, Fowler reacted immediately, and more harshly. That neighbor saw wrong. The strong, overly quick denial, rather than a calm explanation, drew even more attention from the experienced investigators. Veteran investigators all understood that innocent people usually try to cooperate to clear up coincidences, while those involved often react emotionally to shut down the question. At this point, the Michigan State Police placed Fowler on the case's first person of interest list. There was no direct evidence to charge him, but too many factors made him the focal point: the appearance of the green truck at a critical location, contradictory statements, a weak alibi, and the strange soil in the truck bed. However, like every other complex case, the initial truth is not always the final truth, and Roy Fowler, in the eyes of the Alpena police, still had many unanswered questions, both ones he did not want to answer, and ones he did not realize he had inadvertently caused the investigation team to ask. The Amber Collins case had just entered an entirely different chapter, and the green pickup was only the starting point. While the investigators continued to verify Roy Fowler's statements and trace the green pickup, a parallel investigative direction suddenly opened up from another Michigan State Police patrol team. This group was tasked with sweeping abandoned structures near the route the K9C had led to the previous night. One of them was an old warehouse, situated lower than the main road, near a muddy patch that locals often avoided, because rainy seasons made it prone to sinking. The warehouse had been abandoned for many years, the landowner had moved away, and the front door was secured with an old wooden bar but not locked. Children sometimes went in to play, hunters used it as a rain shelter, but most of the time it just sat silently in the forest shadow, rotting over time. As the investigation team approached, they noticed the first thing: the ground right in front of the warehouse door had fresh trampling marks. Not many, just one or two clearer than the others. But unlike animal tracks, deer, weasels, or foxes, these were straight, symmetrical, and had the V-shaped pattern of an adult shoe sole. One officer knelt to estimate the size, measuring the length equivalent to men's size 10 or 11. What drew their attention more was that the soil marks weren't blurred by rain, meaning they had appeared recently, possibly within the last 24 hours. Inside the warehouse, there was a musty smell, thick dust on the wooden beams, and thin strips of light filtering through wall cracks forming narrow lines in the darkness. But when shining flashlights across the wooden floor and corners, police discovered more trampling marks, not as clear as the ones outside the door, but with similar shapes. This indicated the abandoned building wasn't completely forgotten. Someone had been in here around the time of Amber's disappearance. The question arose: who and what were they doing here? In the left corner of the warehouse, the investigation team found a few small items: an empty soda can, a crumpled cigarette pack, an old piece of nylon rope, and a foil food wrapper. Nothing sufficient to confirm this was a holding place or that Amber had ever been here. But one point stood out: all these items were relatively new compared to the rest of the warehouse. The building was very old, but there was no mold on the soda can, foil wrapper, or cigarette filters. They hadn't been there long, perhaps a few days, or even just hours before the team arrived. The lead officer noted, "Someone has used this space around the time of the disappearance." However, upon a more thorough search, police found no signs of Amber, no hair, no fabric, no personal belongings, nothing that could directly link to the girl. This put the investigation team in a difficult position. The abandoned warehouse showed signs of recent entry and exit, right when the green pickup suspect might have been near the forest, but left no traces related to the victim. When they returned to check the door frame, one officer noticed something he described as very strange. The thick dust on the wooden door bar had a small clean streak, at adult shoulder height. It wasn't a hand mark, but more like something, perhaps a box, bag, or hard object, had brushed against it as the person entered or exited. No immediate conclusion, but it led one officer to hypothesize someone might have carried something fairly large in here, not a child. The more they observed, the more the illogical aspects became clear. If this place was used for temporary shelter or a rest stop, people would use the central area, the most open part. But the trampling marks were concentrated in the two dark corners against the walls, as if someone was just standing watching, waiting, or hiding something. If this was a temporary hiding spot, then why no signs of Amber? And if not, why did the footprints appear right when the girl vanished? When police analyzed the route from the Parker's receipt location to the turnoff into the warehouse, they realized a point that made the case even more complicated. The direction of travel the K9 scent led to, and the direction to the warehouse, did not match. What did this mean? Either two different people had passed through the forest area at the same time, or someone was trying to plant traces to mislead the investigation, and the second possibility began to be discussed more. A veteran officer commented, "If the perpetrator chose the northeast escape route, he wouldn't be stupid enough to come back to a warehouse northwest." The fresh shoe prints in the warehouse at this time don't fit behavioral logic, but it couldn't be completely ignored, because the warehouse was the only abandoned structure within a half-mile radius of the scene. It had to be included in the report and become a mandatory checkpoint. As the investigation team prepared to leave, one more small thing made them hesitate. A wooden door at the back of the warehouse, sealed as if it hadn't been opened in years, had slightly misaligned hinges, as if recently subjected to strong force. Just a few millimeters off, but enough for someone experienced with forced doors to notice. One officer tried to open the door, but it was stuck tight, as if broken from the inside. This raised suspicion that someone had opened it outward, then closed it hastily, misaligning and breaking the hinges, but there was no way to enter from the back to verify. The entire team ultimately had to conclude temporarily: the warehouse showed signs of someone entering and exiting, but no direct relation to Amber, at least based on what could be proven that day. This discovery didn't solve the case, but left an uneasy feeling for the whole team, a feeling that they had just touched something, an outer layer of the veil, but the veil still refused to part. And with two conflicting investigative directions, along with evidence possibly staged, the Amber Collins case was increasingly resembling a maze, carefully drawn by someone to pull police into dead-end alleys, with no escape. When the Michigan State Police gathered all the data from the first three investigative directions, the green pickup, the abandoned warehouse, and the witness statements, they realized a terrifying truth that every seasoned investigator understands: all the seemingly promising leads fell apart under deeper scrutiny. And a child missing person case, without a solid direction in the first 48 hours, often slips away very quickly. In the brief meeting in front of the temporary command post, set up right next to the trail Amber usually took, the lead investigator asked the forensics team to finalize their analysis of the green pickup. If this was the opening clue, it needed to be conclusively resolved. The forensics team presented their results. The soil sample stuck to Fowler's truck bed, while similar in color to Opena forest soil, showed microscopic differences in clay content and moisture levels. The soil in the truck bed did not come from the forest area where the canines lost the scent, but from a dirt road near the plumbing repair site where Fowler worked. This shattered the hypothesis that the soil streak was evidence. Next, an officer reported that examination of the old rust layers on Fowler's truck bed showed no signs of carrying heavy loads in the days around Amber's disappearance. The lead investigator frowned. Everything that had made Fowler suspicious, the contradictions in his statements, the truck parked in a suspicious location, now lacked physical evidence to tie him down. This did not make him innocent, but it prevented police from keeping him on the priority suspect list. The final conclusion was entered into the file: Roy Fowler, removed from direct suspect status, continue indirect monitoring. No one was satisfied, but the green pickup, once seen as the key to the opening, had now officially become the first dead end. The second investigative direction, the abandoned warehouse, fared no better. The large shoe prints inside the warehouse were real, not imagined or noise. The foil wrapper, empty soda can, and crumpled cigarette pack were all fresh, proving someone had entered and exited around the time of the disappearance. But with no fingerprints, no DNA, no items related to children, police could not connect the warehouse to Amber. One officer suggested a possibility: someone might have used the warehouse as a temporary stop unrelated to the case. Another officer immediately countered, but the timing is too coincidental. Everything coincided: time, distance, location, but nothing could be tied together. The exact kind of teasing clue that leaves investigators only able to stand and watch, and the suspicion that this was staged evidence began to spread like smoke that is hard to see but impossible to ignore. The warehouse was marked possibly related, but unconfirmable, a label that made it weigh heavier because it did not advance the investigation a single step. The third direction, the neighborhood witnesses, became even more tangled. Witness A's statement was the most reliable, but still just one individual's account. Witness B changed his statement 3 times, severely reducing credibility. Witness C went from evasive to completely silent, refusing further cooperation. Police tried to remove Witness C from the area to reduce pressure, but he firmly refused. This resistance strengthened the feeling that he knows something, but won't say it. But the law did not allow police to force a witness to provide information without valid grounds to treat them as a suspect. Worse still, while police focused on analyzing these 3 statements, 2 more witnesses emerged, each offering a new version of what they thought they saw regarding Amber that morning. One said they saw her near the post office. Another said they saw a figure resembling Amber running toward the southern road. Both statements were dismissed within an hour because they did not match her usual route. But these 2 false statements had a side effect. They added more noise to the investigation, making initial analysis harder to solidify, causing Amber's movement map to have more variations than answers. The lead investigator concluded, "We are standing in a maze of statements, and when all 3 main investigative directions hit dead ends, or lacked evidence, a painful reality emerged in the end-of-day meeting: the case was starting to sink. Not because police wanted to give up, but because they no longer had any foothold to continue expanding. Every lead broke before it could branch into something new. The green pickup, unrelated. The abandoned warehouse, insufficient evidence. Witnesses, too many contradictions, too little verifiable data. Actual physical evidence, nothing new. Direction of travel, only up to the point where the K9s lost the scent. Nothing complete. Nothing strong enough to keep the case in the early phase instead of falling into an ineffective investigative loop." In the internal report, one officer wrote, "All directions are locked. The case risks entering a stalled state." That was a delicate way to describe what everyone knew, but no one wanted to say outright. Amber Collins was gradually becoming an unsolved missing person case. Those cases where after a few weeks, the media stops covering, witnesses stop coming forward, and the community begins to accept that police won't find anything more. On the 3rd night after the disappearance, as patrol cars left the area, and the Alpena forest returned to its familiar darkness, the lead investigator stood in front of the large map hanging in the temporary command post. He looked at the red marked lines, the crowded black ink notes, and the 3 circles indicating the places Amber was last seen, all sharp, clear, but not forming any meaningful picture. He sighed, a long sigh that only those who have witnessed a case gradually fall into terrifying silence could understand. The Amber Collins case, after a few opening days full of hope and determination, had just officially entered its first dead end in the 54-year journey to find the truth. After the first 3 investigative directions all led to dead ends, the Michigan State Police were forced to take the step that any serious investigation team must do when a case begins to slip out of control: reevaluate the entire process, identifying the gaps that appeared right from the earliest hours. And in 1969, with the limitations of technology and methods, those gaps didn't just exist. They grew into massive voids that swallowed every opportunity the police might have had. The lead investigator gathered the team in the temporary room next to the field command post. On the table were the scant pieces of evidence, scene sketches, a few soil samples, some cans and foil from the warehouse, handwritten witness statements, and a few other small items of unclear value. They all lay there, looking like puzzle pieces, not enough to form any picture. And the biggest problem among them, no DNA technology to come to the rescue. The 1960s was an era when a hair found at the scene was treated only as supporting evidence, completely unusable for identifying anyone. Blood could only be typed as A, B, or O, not traced back to an individual. Fingerprints only had value if they matched limited and unsystematic archived records. Meaning, even if the right evidence was right in front of them, in 1969 it could not be exploited deeply enough to break the case. No one suspected that this very limitation would cause the Amber Collins case to drag on for more than half a century. The second gap lay in how the investigation team constructed the survey map. In 1969, Alpena police had no GPS, no ability to simulate terrain or create digital maps like in later decades. They only had drawing paper, pencils, and manual measurements based on footsteps and experienced judgment. When the lead investigator unfolded the case's first survey map, a large sheet with hurried pencil lines, it was not hard to spot the shortcomings. The area Amber might have reached was marked too broadly. Side paths in the forest were not fully represented. Some densely wooded areas were overlooked because visual assessment deemed them unlikely for a child's footprints. Especially the section where the canines lost the scent was simply circled with a basic loop, without detailing depth, softness, or surface soil changes. In missing person cases, the map is the soul of the investigation. An incomplete map leads to inaccurate conclusions. And from this incomplete map, the police that year had unwittingly missed a small trail connecting from the forest to a larger dirt road, a trail that would later be confirmed as the route the perpetrator used to take Amber out of the area. If that trail had been noted from the start, the case might have gone in a completely different direction. But the biggest, most painful gap lay in a small brown evidence bag, stored in a box without anyone examining it closely. During the scene sweep on the second day after the disappearance, a young officer collected a small item at the edge of the trail, something he considered less important than the footprints, so he just placed it in an evidence bag as procedure. It was a long hair strand, stuck to a low pine branch near the path. In 1969, a hair was not evidence, it was just something that could easily fall from anyone. It was nearly useless in any investigation. Without DNA analysis technology, the hair could not be determined to belong to Amber, to a stranger, or to anyone else. It could not be traced to its source, could not be compared. So it was sealed again, placed at the bottom of the evidence box, and then forgotten for decades. The police at the time did not know that this would become the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. They also did not know that more than 50 years later, that very hair strand would open the door to the truth, would bring the old file back to life, and finally point to where Amber Collins had vanished for half a century. But in 1969, it was just one of dozens of small details pushed aside to focus on leads that seemed more promising. The green pickup, the abandoned warehouse, the contradictory witness statements, and that very lack of clarity was what caused the investigation to gradually weaken. On the fourth night after the disappearance, As the lead investigator reviewed everything they had, he had to admit one thing: the case was drifting out of control, not just because of a lack of leads, but because the technology of the time did not allow them to look deeper into clues too small to notice, yet too important to ignore. The crude map led to wrong directions. The absence of DNA made evidence useless. A hair strand, that should have been treated as a landmark, was filed under not worth analyzing. The case at that point was like a coarse fabric stretched tight. Many small holes not large enough to patch immediately, but together they formed a long tear. And though the police did not know it in 1969, these gaps would become the main reason the Amber Collins case sank into silence for decades, until modern science returned to find it in the darkness. As the investigation entered its third week, and all directions had run dry, the Michigan State Police could no longer avoid the truth. The disappearance of Amber Collins was shifting from an urgent search to an unsolved case. The lead investigator still hoped for a late breakthrough, but his experience told him that cases like this, without clear witnesses, without identifiable physical evidence, without traces leaving the scene, often drift into a gray area where police lacked the tools to proceed further. On the 19th day after the disappearance, at the MSP regional headquarters in Alpena, a closed-door meeting was held. No press, no Amber's family, only the investigators, team leaders, and a representative from the Michigan Attorney General's office. The reports were placed on the table: conclusions from the green pickup analysis, the warehouse report, witness statement compilation, terrain assessment, and the scant evidence list. All pointed to the same thing: no evidence strong enough to continue an active investigation. A thin sheet of paper was placed in the center, the case reclassification form. It had three options: 1. Missing person; 2. Runaway; 3. Missing person. Suspected abduction. The lead investigator checked the third box. Amber Collins had just been officially classified under missing, suspected abduction, a heavier categorization than any words in previous reports, and it forced police to acknowledge that this was no longer a case of a child getting lost. No accident, no mishap. A criminal act had occurred, but there were not enough traces to determine its nature. From here, everything changed. Amber's file was transferred from the Special Task Force to the Cold Case Unit, where cases lacking data are stored by case number awaiting new leads. MSP did not close the case in the legal sense, but closed it in the practical sense. No more active investigation team, no more full-time personnel, no more expanded searches. The investigation captain stated it clearly in the final report: until new physical evidence or verifiable new statements emerge, the Amber Collins case will suspend active investigation. For many younger investigators, this decision was hard to accept. Some reacted right in the meeting: the Northern Forest area hasn't been fully searched. We haven't re-interviewed witness C. The small trail at the edge of the dirt road hasn't been surveyed in detail. But all were stopped by one simple question no one could answer: where to search next, and based on what? Many did not accept it. However, the system did not allow indefinite investigation with limited budgets and dozens of other cases awaiting resolution. No new witnesses, no technological miracle, no better map, no DNA, no foothold. When the meeting ended, the lid of Amber Collins' casebox was closed with two metal clasps. A new label was affixed: Case 69 AC 117, status, inactive. Some officers stood silently as the box was carried into the storage room. It was a cold, long room filled with metal shelves holding brown case boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. Amber's case file, one of the incidents that had shaken the entire town, was now just another box among hundreds of others, each containing an unfinished story. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it clearly: once a child case goes into storage, the chance of survival almost disappears, and the likelihood of solving the case decreases with each passing year. The town of Alpena felt that emptiness very quickly. Newspaper coverage thinned out, then vanished completely. Missing person flyers remained posted on the library bulletin board, but were no longer replaced. The Collins family continued searching through small efforts, asking neighbors, inquiring in nearby towns, calling orphanages, but they knew full well that without police support, every effort relied only on luck. And luck had long abandoned them. Amber Collins, 11 years old, vanished without a trace under the Michigan summer sunlight, and no one knew where she had gone. For the 54 years that followed, people still recalled that day's event as a haunting memory, a well-behaved girl walking on a familiar road, then turning into the line of trees and disappearing from the world. But in 1969, as the case box slid into its place on the metal shelf, it was all recorded in just 3 short lines in the report. No evidence, no suspects, no new investigative direction. File stored until breakthrough. No one knew that right inside that silent box, among a few old papers, scattered reports, and an unnamed hair strand deemed unimportant, lay the key to the entire Amber Collins case. 2 decades passed since the day Amber Collins vanished from the dirt road leading to the Alpena Library. The file numbered 69 AC 117 lay quietly in the Michigan State Police storage, gathering dust but never completely forgotten. Occasionally, a new employee, or a veteran investigator driven by professional obsession, would pull the box down to review it, only to realize it still offered nothing new. The unnamed hair strand remained there, sealed in its evidence bag, no one knowing that its value would only be recognized decades later. But even though the official file was not reopened, the Amber Collins case never disappeared from the minds of the Michigan community. And this lingering interest led to a series of false leads, erroneous reports, and mistaken identifications that repeatedly pulled the investigation away from the already very faint straight path. The first false lead appeared in 1982, exactly 13 years after Amber's disappearance. A woman in Traverse City reported that at a shopping center, she saw a young girl who looked very much like Amber grown up, based on a photo published in the local paper that year. She described the girl as having brown hair, a petite build, and eyes that were very familiar. MSP immediately sent a team to check, but when they arrived, the girl turned out to be a 16-year-old teenager from Indiana vacationing with her family. No connection whatsoever. This case seemed harmless, but it set a precedent. People who thought they had seen Amber began calling police more often, and each call dragged the investigation into pointless circles. In 1987, a more dangerous report emerged. An anonymous man sent a letter to MSP, claiming that Amber had been seen living in a mobile home on the outskirts of Detroit, held captive by an older man. The letter described the location clearly enough that police could not ignore it. A raid was organized, only to find 2 middle-aged alcoholic men living in squalor, with no trace of children. When examining the handwriting, the investigation team suspected the sender might just be an attention seeker, a type of hoaxer that frequently appears in long-running missing persons cases. But the most disruptive report was not the calls or anonymous letters, it was a photograph. In 1991, a small newspaper in Wisconsin ran a story about a homeless girl who had been found. The black and white photo of the girl, gaunt with deep-set eyes, was placed next to an age-progressed image of Amber at 11. Readers immediately called Alpena, insisting this had to be Amber. Local media jumped in, creating a wave of speculation, with some headlines even reading, "Has Amber returned after 22 years?" MSP was forced to contact Wisconsin police, and within hours, they received the results. The girl was a 17-year-old runaway, with a clear identity, completely unrelated to the 1969 case. The Collins family collapsed once again, each false hope tearing open the old pain. In 1994, a 50-year-old man told friends that he knew where Amber was buried. The statement quickly spread, forcing police to interrogate him. When questioned, he admitted he had said it while drunk, but still had to provide a statement. Nothing relevant. This incident made MSP realize that the Amber Collins case was no longer just a case, it had become a symbol, and symbols are easily distorted by collective imagination. Even the new technology of the 1990s contributed to the noise. A group of college students sent police an age-progressed photo they had created themselves using experimental software. They thought they were helping. Unfortunately, the image was inaccurate, but it spread, leading to a series of mistaken identifications in the years that followed. Every time police had to follow a wrong lead, time was lost. One MSP investigator once said, "We're not afraid of criminals, we're afraid of leads that go nowhere." But the worst case occurred in 1999, exactly 30 years after Amber vanished. A woman claiming to be Amber Collins called a hotline, saying she had escaped her captor after years of imprisonment. Her voice trembled as she described a dark room, being taken away in a truck, the Michigan woods. The voice convinced police that this might be the real breakthrough. They traced the phone number. It came from a bar in a town near Grand Rapids. The woman was a drunk prankster who knew nothing about the case, just trying to shock her friends. This led a former investigator to exclaim in an internal report, "The Amber case has been drowned in a sea of misinformation. Until real evidence is found, every lead is just a mirage." Over 2 decades, the Amber Collins file only grew thicker with worthless papers, false reports, mistaken identifications, fabricated statements, baseless rumors, hoaxers, self-proclaimed pastors receiving revelations, and people who genuinely believed they had seen Amber living somewhere. Not one of those leads advanced the investigation a single step. In 1989, the file was closed again. In 1995, reviewed and closed again. In 1999, reviewed and closed once more. The case became so cluttered with noise that MSP itself admitted, "Only physical evidence can save this case. Otherwise, every piece of information just muddies the water." That statement would prove prophetic, because in 2003, something no one could have expected happened. A new technology emerged in forensics, and it would bring the Amber Collins case back into the light after 34 years in the dark. As the early 2000s began, forensic technology started advancing rapidly. DNA analysis became feasible on many types of evidence that had previously been completely useless. This led to a series of old cases across the United States being re-examined, including the Amber Collins file. In April 2003, when the Michigan State Police Forensic Lab officially launched the Cold Case DNA Initiative, Amber Collins' name appeared on the priority list due to the nature of the case: a missing child, no body, and small evidence collected from the scene. Reopening the file marked the first turning point in 34 years, and when the younger investigators approached File 69 AC 117 with a more modern perspective, they quickly focused on 3 individuals who had surfaced in the early phase but were never fully investigated: Roy Fowler, Victor Hartman, Henry Tate. These 3 names were not connected to each other in any way: different ages, different occupations, different social circles, but they shared one significant common point that placed them on the returning suspects list. All 3 had been near the area where Amber vanished on that morning in July 1969. Roy Fowler, the man with the green pickup. Fowler was the most prominent name in the initial phase of the investigation. The green pickup truck, stopped unusually near the trail, had made him the first person of interest. Although cleared as a primary suspect in 1969, due to lack of evidence, Fowler was never completely removed from the minds of some veteran investigators. In 2003, when the file was reopened, Fowler was 76 years old, living in a small town south of Alpena. The reason he returned to the suspect list was not due to anything new, but because of things that had never been satisfactorily explained: contradictory statements about leaving the house that morning, the strange soil streak once found on the truck bed. Even though it later didn't match the location, it was still unusual. He had been near the forest at the exact time Amber disappeared. No one could confirm his alibi. A young investigator on the cold case team remarked, "In a case with no direction, the first person suspected, but never fully investigated, always has to be brought back." So even without new evidence, Fowler was placed as suspect number 1 in the file reclassification phase. Victor Hartman, the out-of-season hunter. Hartman was not mentioned much in the original file, but his name appeared in a 1969 side report. He was an amateur hunter, living about 3 miles from the forest, and on the day Amber vanished, he was seen by a neighbor carrying a gun and heading into the woods to check a hunting spot. The problem was, legal hunting season did not occur in July. This made Hartman's explanation strange right from 1969, but since his wife and 2 children testified, that he left home late after the time Amber was last seen. Police at the time did not pursue this lead. When reviewing the file in 2003, the investigation team realized family testimony is often weaker than testimony from outsiders. The direction Hartman went hunting matched the direction the K9 SES led before losing the scent. Hartman had been fined for illegal hunting in 1967, meaning he had a history of lying for personal hobbies. He was one of the few people in Alpena at the time familiar with the side trails in the forest. Most importantly, Hartman lived near the small trail that the 1969 map had overlooked, but became clear in 2003 when cross-referenced with satellite maps. With this, Hartman was immediately brought back into the investigation file as suspect number 2. Henry Tate, the man lingering on the town's edge. Tate had been a faint name in the original file. At the time of Amber's disappearance, he was 29 years old, unemployed, and often wandered around the Collins neighborhood. Tate was not a criminal, but police had received a few reports about him staring at children near the library. In 1969, with no evidence of criminal behavior, Tate was briefly interviewed and then removed from the suspect list. But in the archived file was one detail overlooked for decades. An anonymous witness had once said they saw a man standing in the shadows of the trees near the fork where Amber vanished. Description: about 5'10" tall, thin build, long black hair covering part of the forehead, wearing a light jacket despite the hot weather. When the cold case team reviewed it, they realized the description matched Tate in his younger years surprisingly well. Even more suspicious, Tate left Alpena just 3 weeks after the disappearance. No clear reason, no prior notice, no forwarding address. The file noted, unusual relocation, unexplained. This is the kind of behavior that in modern investigations is seen as a red flag. But in 1969, it was considered personal freedom. No one looked at it a second time, until 2003. From someone viewed as odd but harmless, Tate became suspect number 3. 3 men, one deadly common thread. Roy Fowler appeared with the green pickup at the exact time. Victor Hartman, present in the forest out of season, near the direction Amber's trail was lost. Henry Tate had lingered near the library, matched the description of the man in the tree shadows, and left town right after the disappearance. A cold case investigator summarized on the analysis board: 3 men, 3 investigative directions. One common point: all were near the area where Amber vanished that morning. This made the 3 suspects the focus of the re-investigation phase, and each had a secret yet to be uncovered. But the 2003 investigation team still lacked the most important thing: physical evidence. They just didn't know that the evidence, a nameless hair strand from 1969, was lying right in front of them, waiting for the day technology advanced enough to reveal the mystery they could not see 34 years earlier. Although 2003 marked the first effort to revive the Amber Collins case after more than 3 decades, reality was far harsher. After several months of reviewing the file, analyzing the 3 suspects, and re-examining the evidence, the Michigan State Police cold case team had to face the same problem that the 1969 investigators had encountered: too many questions, too little data. The forensic advances of that time, though a massive leap from the 1960s, were still not enough to resurrect a file that time had nearly eroded every chance from. And so, like countless other missing persons cases in America, the Amber Collins file drifted back toward the darkest, quietest shelves in storage. Once again, missing pages, pieces of the case lost to time. The young investigator in charge of re-inventorying the file noticed it first when reopening the case box. Some pages were gone. Not the entire file, but the most important ones. The initial scene description, the shoe print analysis, 2 witness interview reports were torn, ink faded, or missing sections. Some pages had been photocopied in the 1980s, but the originals were no longer there. This created unverifiable gaps. The first statement from witness C was only half a page. The preliminary sketch of the disturbed soil had lost its technical annotations. The young officer's note about the hair collected in 1969 was only a faint handwritten version, missing the date and confirming signature. No one knew how they were lost, due to storage transfers, water leaks, administrative errors, or simply time. But each missing page was a part of the case's memory swept away, never to be recovered. A cold case investigator wrote in an internal memo, "We are investigating a case where half the memory has been lost. Degraded evidence, technology arriving later than time's decay." Even though MSP had tried to preserve evidence under the most stable conditions possible, the long years still caused everything to deteriorate. Sealed bags had faded, old plastic edges had warped, and soil samples had crumbled to the point where the original texture could no longer be determined. But the most regrettable was still the hair, the clue once deemed unimportant in 1969. When the forensic expert opened the sealed bag, they found the hair shaft broken in one section, the outer cuticle flaking off in patches, the root bulb, the most critical part for DNA extraction, almost completely gone. The technology of 2003 could do a lot, but it could not recreate a root bulb damaged by suboptimal storage conditions over 3 decades. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of cold case investigations is when technology finally catches up to the case, only for the evidence to no longer be intact enough for that technology to work. All the other evidence, the soda can, foil wrapper, cigarette pack from the warehouse, the Parker's receipt fragment, had lost any biological traces. No sweat, no skin cells, no clear fingerprints. The Amber file at this point was like a machine with no fuel. No matter how determined the investigators were, they could not move forward. Silence enveloping, the case nearly frozen solid, when no breakthrough emerged after the re-examination process. The Amber Collins file was once again returned to inactive status. No full-time assigned officer, no dedicated task force monitoring it, no media interest, no resources to continue digging into the past. Some younger investigators still voluntarily reviewed documents on weekends, as a kind of professional challenge, but after a few months with no new leads, they had to move on to other files. The case gradually slipped off the radar of Michigan's law enforcement system, not because anyone wanted to forget, but because the investigative machinery has limits. New cases require resources. New missing children in Alpena, Detroit, Grand Rapids need priority. Amber, in a way, was displaced by time. The Collins family, efforts dwindling over the years. Amber's parents, as they entered old age, no longer had the strength to visit every town handing out her photo. In the 1980s they had chased media coverage, but by the 2000s, every effort was exhausted. They still kept Amber's photo at age 11, in a small frame on the living room shelf. They still kept the habit of not locking the door at night, so she could come home any time. But they knew, even without saying it, that hope was being worn away. A case swallowed by darkness. By 2010, among Michigan's list of over 600 cold cases, the Amber Collins case was ranked only under missing, historical, meaning a historical disappearance, a label almost synonymous with no longer solvable. No new reports, no new witnesses, no updates, no progress. The case lay still like a stone at the bottom of Lake Huron, covered in algae, unknown to anyone. No one, even the most seasoned investigators, could have imagined that just when every door seemed closed, the truth was quietly moving toward the light, because science was about to enter a new revolution, and the old brown case box numbered 69 AC 117, forgotten, shoved into a cold corner, still contained the thing that the technology of the 2010s was about to turn into the answer, after 54 years of despair. In 2023, Michigan entered a major overhaul phase in its cold case investigation system. Ultra-sensitive DNA testing technology, something that 2 decades earlier existed only in FBI labs, had now become more widespread, cheaper, and most importantly, capable of analyzing extremely small evidence, even samples degraded after decades. This was the moment when the Michigan Cold Case Unit was re-established with a clear goal to find justice for victims swallowed by time. On the new investigation team's desk, hundreds of old files were stacked in layers, each file an unfinished story, each victim a name waiting to be mentioned again. Among those case boxes was an old brown one, edges worn, label faded, with only 4 shaky letters still visible. 69, a C, 117. When young investigator Emma Ridley opened that case box, she had no idea she was touching a disappearance that had lasted longer than her own life. She only skimmed the cover page: Amber Collins, missing, suspected abduction, July 1969, Alpena. But as she turned each page, the gaps in the old investigation appeared as clear as surgical lights in a lab: incomplete maps, evidence not thoroughly analyzed, contradictory witnesses, and especially a small evidence bag clipped at the bottom of the documents. A clear sealed bag, edges yellowed, containing one single item, a long hair strand. When she saw it, Emma had no idea this was the evidence once deemed unimportant in 1969. Something police back then only collected as procedure. But from the moment she looked at it, her professional instinct told her this was not disposable evidence. In the review report, she wrote, Evidence 12, hair strand. Condition degraded but structure intact. DNA analysis potential, yes. Those last 4 words, DNA analysis potential, were the signal the Amber case had waited for over 54 years. Cold Case Unit determines. The hair strand is the focus to decide which cases to reopen first. The Michigan Cold Case Unit relied on a 3-factor rule. 1. High-severity case: children, murder, unusual disappearance. 2. Evidence still testable. 3. Suspects potentially identifiable through genetic analysis. The Amber Collins file met all 3 factors, but the second was the most critical. An internal unit meeting agreed, if this hair strand contains even one root cell, we can identify who left it. That meant, if the hair was Amber's, they would know where the girl had stood or been pulled through when the hair fell. If it belonged to someone else, it could be the perpetrator. If it contained male DNA, it could link to the 3 old suspects. And most importantly, creating a genetic profile would allow genealogical tracing, the tool that had solved hundreds of cold cases in the U.S. over the past decade. The Amber file was immediately prioritized for testing. Investigator Ridley added one more line to the report: the hair strand is not coincidental evidence. Location found, low near child height, indicates it fell during contact with the tree branch. Additionally, hair length suggests it is very likely female. This made the entire team hold their breath. If it was Amber's hair, they could trace her final journey. If not, they could find the person who was with her before she vanished. The testing process, and the invisible anxiety, even though technology had advanced far, a 54-year-old hair strand without a root bulb was still a difficult challenge. Modern forensics could analyze mitochondrial DNA, micDNA, the type that doesn't require a root bulb, and can trace maternal lines, but mtDNA cannot precisely identify an individual. It only determines which family branch they belong to. To track down a perpetrator, they needed luck. The hair had to retain at least one cell containing nuclear DNA. Chance of success, under 20%, but Cold Case Unit lead investigator Mark Galvez still decided to try. He once said, "A small chance is still a chance. This case deserves the attempt." The hair strand was transferred to the Lansing lab in a sealed glass tube, accompanied by the full file describing the discovery location. And when the forensic experts placed the hair under the microscope, they discovered something that made the entire unit fall silent for a few seconds. The cuticle was flaking, the shaft fragile, but the hair still had a very small section of the broken root, not completely devoid of cellular material. In that moment, the Cold Case Unit knew they had a chance, the first chance in 54 years, a chance that the 1969 investigators could never have imagined. The Amber Collins file is officially reopened on August 9, 2023. File 69 AC 117 received a new label: Active Investigation, DNA Analysis in Progress. After more than half a century, lying silent on a metal shelf, the case of 11-year-old Amber Collins had finally returned to the light. Modern DNA technology, something that did not exist in 1969, was about to reveal the truth that the Alpena forest had hidden for too long. And the hair strand, once considered useless evidence, had become the key to solving the case. 54 years of searching, 54 years of silence, 54 years of dormant evidence. Only in 2023, when technology had overcome the old limits, did the secret of Amber Collins finally have a chance to be decoded. The hair strand collected in 1969 was submitted to modern DNA testing at the end of August 2023. The forensics team in Lansing worked with near absolute caution. Every millimeter of the hair shaft was scraped, separated, and examined, because they understood that if the cellular material in that tiny root section was damaged during processing, the entire case would return to darkness forever. The extracted DNA was so scant it was described as dust from dust, but next-generation sequencing technology could read extremely short gene fragments, piecing them together to build an incomplete but sufficient DNA profile for genetic genealogy analysis. In early September, the forensics team officially uploaded the hair strand's DNA data to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, two widely used genealogy databases in U.S. cold case investigations. The data was marked authorized for law enforcement use, in compliance with federal regulations. Within 48 hours, the first results appeared, a series of distant matches, people sharing very small DNA segments with the hair sample. But only one result made the entire investigation team jump to their feet: a woman named Mary Garland, living in Arizona. DNA match, but not in the way everyone expected. Typically, in criminal cases, when DNA yields a match, the matched person is the suspect or the victim. But here, Mary Garland didn't fit any profile. Mary lived in Phoenix, around 60 years old, worked as a cashier in a supermarket, had no connection to Michigan, and clearly could not be Amber. So why did Mary's profile match strongly with the hair strand found at the scene? Investigator Emma Ridley reread the data multiple times, then realized the key point. The match was not a direct match, it was a genealogical match. Mary Garland was not the perpetrator. She was not the victim either. She was a distant relative of the person who left the hair, sharing the same maternal genetic branch. Upon deeper analysis, the genealogy expert confirmed similarity level of 90/130 centimorgans, corresponding to third or fourth cousin relationship, strong enough to trace back 3-4 generations. Investigator Ridley almost exclaimed in the meeting room when the family tree model appeared on the screen, "If we find the root of this branch, we will find who left the hair," and that person was standing where Amber vanished. Immediately, the cold case unit moved to the next step, building a family tree based on Mary Garland's DNA. Genealogy tracing backward, searching for the family root. Mary had deceased parents, but her family records were fairly complete: maternal grandmother, from Ohio; paternal grandfather from Wisconsin; great-grandparents who had lived in Michigan in the 1930s, 1940s. The last detail drew special attention from the team. Mary's maternal side had lived in Michigan, and some members moved to northern Michigan during the 1950s, 1970s. This was exactly the period when Amber disappeared. The genealogy investigation team began constructing a laminated tree, multi-layered family tree, tracing the maternal branches of Mary's lineage across 4 generations. After 3 weeks, they identified 31 individuals on the maternal line, 14 who had lived within a 100-mile radius of Alpena, 7 of suitable age to be adults in 1969, 3 males who could have been near the scene. But one person stood out the most: a woman named Mary Garland, had no original birth certificate. Mary Garland's AB normal records. The first thing the investigation team did was review Mary's personal records, standard procedure in genetic genealogy, and immediately, they discovered a series of anomalies. Mary's birth certificate was a reissue from 1976, not the original from 1963. The certificate listed birthplace as Yuma, Arizona, but Yuma Hospital had no record of a child named Mary Garland born that year. The doctor's signature on the form did not match archived signatures from the same period. The parent's address listed in the records did not exist in 1963. The most chilling part, according to the Social Security number verification system, Mary Garland had no activity traces before 1978, no school records, no vaccination records, no dental records, no moving records. She seemed to appear in life as an entity without a past. When investigator Ridley reviewed all the documents, she only uttered one sentence: "Mary Garland is not her real name." A haunting question: who is Mary Garland, and why was her DNA at the place where Amber vanished in 1969? The investigation team sat in the meeting room, staring at the sprawling family tree on the large screen, a maternal lineage spreading from Ohio to Michigan, branches splitting in the 1950s, some members moving to Alpena. During the exact period Amber was abducted, and a woman with a false identity, living in Arizona, the person with the closest DNA match to the hair from the scene. The genealogy analysts concluded the person who left the hair is blood related to Mary Garland, but not Mary herself. High probability it is Mary's biological mother or aunt. This turned the case in a completely new direction. The Amber Collins disappearance may be linked to a member of Mary's family line, someone who lived in Michigan in the late 1960s. One investigator asked the most critical question: if Mary Garland has a false identity, what is that identity hiding, and is it related to Amber? No one could answer, but everyone felt one thing: this lead was unlike the false leads of the past 20 years. This was a DNA match. It could not be faked. It could not be mistaken. It could not be coincidence. One family branch, one woman without a real past, one 54-year-old hair strand, and a girl who vanished in Alpena in 1969. Everything was connecting into a hazy shape, not complete yet, but enough for the Michigan Cold Case Unit to feel they had stepped onto the right path. The Amber Collins case, once thought forever buried by time, had just taken a long step out of the darkness, and the next answer lay with a woman named Mary Garland, who herself had no idea that her DNA had just turned one of Michigan's longest-running missing persons cases from cold case to active investigation. When the Michigan Cold Case Unit identified Mary Garland as the closest genealogical match to the hair strand collected at the Amber Collins crime scene, they understood that they needed to approach her immediately, not as a suspect, but as the most important witness in the past 54 years. Mary, according to legal records, was a 60-year-old woman living a quiet life in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. She worked as a cashier at a supermarket, described by co-workers as quiet, polite, and without close family. But in reality, that silence held something deeper. Perhaps even she didn't understand why her past felt like a mirror clouded over her entire life. The first interview took place in early October 2023, in a small conference room at the FBI Phoenix office, where MSP sought assistance. Investigators Emma Ridley and team leader Mark Galvez conducted the interview directly. Mary entered the room looking confused, clutching her purse strap tightly, her eyes wary but not defensive like someone accused, more like someone who had always feared her past might be exposed without knowing what waited beyond. Emma began gently, "We're not here to accuse you of anything. We just want to understand a few things about your genealogy and family origins." Mary was silent for a long time before nodding. Mary Garland, a past like a void. When they asked Mary to talk about her childhood, she paused, looked down at her hands, and confessed something she had never told anyone. "I don't remember much about my early childhood. I remember Arizona, the sun, a few neighborhoods, but before age 8, everything is hazy. Like a dream someone erased piece by piece." Emma asked, "Do you remember foster parents, or the family who raised you?" Mary shook her head. "My mother, the woman who raised me, said I was born in Yuma, but I have no memories of the hospital, preschool, old neighbors, just one single memory. I don't know if it's real, or a dream." That was the moment the room fell completely silent. Mary continued in a slightly trembling voice. "I remember a wooden cabin, small, creaky floors. The smell of pine and wood stove smoke. Outside was forest. I remember a rotten wooden step at the back door, and someone telling me not to go outside." Investigator Galvez immediately looked at Emma. The description of a wooden cabin in the forest matched the structures of abandoned warehouses and cabins in the area where Amber disappeared. Mary had no idea about that. She went on, "And I remember another little girl, younger than me. I don't remember her face. Just long brown hair. And I remember she cried a lot, saying she wanted to go home. Emma's heart tightened. Galvez stopped taking notes and looked up at Mary, a little girl with long brown hair. Memories of a cabin in the forest, instructions not to go outside. If those fragmented memories were real, then Mary might have been in Michigan, not Arizona, in the late 1960s, and that brown-haired girl could be Amber Collins. Chilling coincidences, Emma gently asked, "Do you remember who took care of you in the cabin?" Mary frowned, trying to pull back the fragments. "A man, I think so." Deep voice, "He never let us go out in daylight. I remember him slamming the door hard, and I was afraid of his footsteps on the wooden steps." Galvez recognized that this description matched astonishingly with a 1969 witness statement, a man standing in the tree shadows, tall, silently watching. The footprints in the abandoned cabin, the items like soda cans, cigarette butts, nylon rope, all could belong to the man Mary remembered. Mary continued, "I remember once looking through a crack in the cabin door. I saw the forest, but I also saw snow, thick falling snow. Arizona doesn't have snow like that." Emma replied in a calm voice, but unable to hide the tension in her eyes. "Michigan does. Alpena has a lot of snow in winter." Mary trembled slightly upon hearing the word Michigan. She gripped the edge of the table. "I don't know why that name scares me, but every time I hear Michigan, I feel a pain in my chest." That wasn't the reaction of someone hearing new information. That was the reaction of suppressed memory. DNA confirmation, an irreversible turning point. After the first interview, the cold case unit collected a saliva sample from Mary, under proper legal procedure, to confirm the genealogical DNA. 2 weeks later, the results appeared on the screen like a cut through 54 years of fog. Mary Garland and the DNA from the hair strand shared 12 characteristic maternal haplotype segments from the Collins line. In other words, Mary was a distant relative of the Collins family itself. The result caused a heavy silence to fall over the cold case unit meeting room, not from surprise, but because they knew it would lead to massive consequences. If Mary was blood related to the Collins maternal line, and if her cabin memories were real, then the most likely scenario was Mary was not an innocent bystander. Mary was the second child abducted around the same time as Amber, or shortly after. This explained the false identity in 1976, the hazy records before age 8, no real birth certificate, no school records in Arizona, memories of the wooden cabin, recollection of another brown-haired girl who cried often. Mary began looking at them with eyes full of fear, as Emma presented the DNA results. "You are blood related to the Collins family. You could be a distant cousin of Amber, or you may have been in the same place as her in 1969. Mary brought her hand to her mouth, lips trembling. Was I ever in Michigan? Was that little girl the one everyone is looking for?" Emma placed her hand on the table, speaking very slowly. "We're not sure yet, but it's very possible you witnessed something, or were part of a story you no longer remember." Mary broke down crying, not loud sobbing, but choked, suppressed crying, the kind from someone who had just realized half her life was built on a false birth certificate, on memories hidden in darkness for decades. She said between broken breaths, "If I was in that cabin, if I met that little girl, then where was I taken from?" Emma didn't answer, because that answer might be even more painful than the truth about the cabin. Mary Garland might be the second victim of Amber Collins's abductor, a child taken away, renamed, given a false identity, and raised without knowing who she really was. When the interview ended, Investigator Galvez looked at the hair strand in the sealed bag, as if seeing a piece of a massive mystery suddenly illuminated. 54 years after Amber vanished, for the first time in the case's history, police had a living witness, a person with erased memories, DNA tracing back to the Collins line, and someone who had seen the wooden cabin in the Alpena forest. The story was gradually taking shape, and Mary Garland, without knowing it, had just become the second key leading to the truth about Amber Collins. When Mary Garland described her hazy memories, the wooden cabin, the pine forest, the rotten step, the sound of a man's footsteps, the cold case unit team seized every detail like rare guideposts in 54 years of darkness, and when she mentioned thick falling snow, the smell of wood stove smoke, and the back step lower than the ground level, lead investigator Mark Galvez knew they could no longer treat this as mere fragmented memories. Michigan has thousands of wooden cabins scattered across its national forests, but Ottawa National Forest, about 270 miles west of Alpena, was the area with terrain and climate most closely matching Mary's description. In the 1960s, 70s, Ottawa had over 40 private cabins scattered along pine forests and ATV trails, many of them unregistered or long abandoned. When Mary described again the back door one step lower, creaky wooden floors, and a large tree shading one side of the cabin wall, Galvez immediately ordered cross-referencing, with all old cabin maps obtained from the U.S. Forest Service. One cabin stood out right away, Cabin 14, owned by a man named Bernard Holt, purchased in 1957, abandoned since 1971. The cabin's specific location was deep in the forest, near a small stream where thick snow often accumulated in winter. Holt had been accused of child abuse in 1962, but lacked sufficient evidence for prosecution. He disappeared from Michigan in 1973. The final note in Holt's file, written in faded pencil, cabin possibly related to a child disappearance in the area. No one knew which case it referred to. But when Mary's description of the cabin matched the file for Cabin 14 almost detail for detail, they knew it was time to go to Ottawa. The trip to Ottawa Forest, the first in 54 years, on October 19, 2023, 4 investigators and 2 forensic experts began heading into Ottawa Forest in off-road vehicles. From the parking point, they had to hike a long stretch through dense pine forest, the dry leaves and early fall snow creating a strange muffled sound underfoot. The cabin appeared after nearly 2 hours of travel. Small, gray-weathered wooden walls, slanted roof, the step exactly as Mary described, a rotten wooden plank, sunken as if stepped on heavily many times. The front door was secured with a wooden bar, not a metal lock, just as Mary had described. But the stranger thing, the cabin showed no signs of being disturbed in years, yet it wasn't completely succumbed to decay, as if someone had once protected it from wildlife damage or had returned for light maintenance. Investigator Emma Ridley sensed it clearly, just seconds after standing at the door. This isn't a normal abandoned cabin. They broke the bar and entered. Inside the cabin, the first signs of children flashlight beams swept through the dark wooden room, dust floating in streaks, rotten wooden table, collapsed chair, old fireplace. But just 2 meters deeper in, Galvez stopped. On the table surface, despite the dust, were 2 small handprints, not adult handprints, not animal prints, children's handprints. The forensic expert immediately took out a magnetic powder kit and began processing. The second investigator called out, "Over here, something under the floorboard." A loose floorboard. When they lifted it, a tin box appeared, rusted on the outside, but with the lid still intact. Inside the box, something that silenced the entire room for several seconds, was a Polaroid SX70 camera, a small exercise notebook, and an Alpena Memorial Library card in the name, Amber Collins. Emma stood frozen. Galvez looked at her, his eyes wide in disbelief. A Polaroid in Cabin 14, over 250 miles from where Amber vanished. The forensic investigator trembled slightly. We've just found something directly linked to Amber. The Polaroids, evidence that doesn't lie. There were 4 Polaroid photos in the tin box. Though faded with time, they were still clear enough to send chills down everyone's spine. Photo 1, an 12-year-old girl, sitting on a wooden bed inside the cabin. Brown, long hair, large eyes, face visibly tense and gaunt. The photo had no name, but it looked too much like Amber's 1969 missing person photo. Photo 2, the cabin from the outside, taken at an angle, showing only one back door, exactly as Mary described in her memory. Photo 3, A man standing in the corner of the room, back turned, tall, thin build, broad shoulders, face not visible. Photo 4, a younger girl, about 7 years old, light blonde hair, looking straight at the camera with a frightened expression. Galvez stared at the photo for a long time. This definitely isn't Amber, but it could be the second child Mary mentioned. The exercise notebook, proof Amber lived in the cabin. The small notebook, pages yellowed. Opening it, childlike scrawled handwriting. My name is Amber Collins. July 14, 1969, I want to go home. The last line more scribbled, as if written in fear. He says we can't leave. Emma had to turn away for a few seconds to stay composed. For years people had assumed Amber was killed, soon after disappearing, but the notebook proved the opposite. Amber was still alive days, possibly weeks, after being abducted. The library card, undeniable proof. The small cardstock library card, hand-coded serial number, name clearly printed, Amber Collins' address, Maple Street, Alpena. It could only belong to Amber. No one could coincidentally leave her library card in a cabin 250 miles from Alpena. The truth was painfully clear. The abductor had taken Amber to Ottawa, not to kill her immediately, but to hold her. And even more horrifying, not just one child had been here. Ottawa cabin, where Amber lived after disappearing. As the forensic experts swept the cabin, they found more child-sized footprints size 3, 4, small fabric scraps from children's clothing, a button fallen under the bed, and very small scratch marks on the wall behind the fireplace, from children's fingernails. Emma wrote in the report, the cabin clearly shows at least 2 children were kept here for a significant period. Investigator Galvez wrote the shortest but most important conclusion in 54 years of investigation. Amber Collins lived in this cabin after her disappearance. No more doubt, no more hypotheses, no more ambiguity. Amber did not vanish from the world immediately. She was taken, lived, wrote, cried, and begged for help, right in this cabin. But the most terrifying question remained. Who brought her here? And the second child, the blonde-haired girl, who was she? Ottawa cabin was not just a turning point. It was the door opening to a secret Michigan had buried for over half a century. And it all began with one small hair strand fallen on a tree branch in 1969. When the Ottawa cabin revealed evidence that Amber had lived there, along with the shadowy figure of a man in the Polaroid photo, the cold case unit shifted all resources to identifying this man. The Polaroid showed no clear face, but the silhouette, posture, broad shoulders, straight back, and slightly bent elbows like someone accustomed to carrying heavy loads all pointed to a man aged 35, 45 at the time the photo was taken. Investigator Emma Ridley, working with the genealogy expert, cross-referenced the records of Cabin 14's landowner, Bernard Holt, but concluded that Holt had sold the cabin to a man using an unregistered name in 1967. The transfer agreement was an old handwritten document, not notarized, signed only with 3 initials, e.g. While investigating the genetic branch linked to Mary Garland's DNA, Emma began noticing a name that appeared in a distant branch, a man named Earl Garland. The last name matched Mary's, and Earl had lived in Michigan. Even more notably, Earl had lived in the exact area near Ottawa, from 1966 to 1970. The coincidence could not be ignored. Earl Garland's timeline matches the day Amber vanished. Earl's income tax records, which MSP obtained from 1971 files, revealed a chilling detail. Earl Garland had worked as a delivery driver for a small company in Alpena during the summer of 1969. The company specialized in transporting building materials between Alpena and Ironwood, a route that passed through the Ottawa Forest area. On July 6, 1969, the exact day Amber disappeared, Earl was recorded as absent without notice from work. No one explained the reason. No paycheck, no leave request. Just a scribbled note from the supervisor, Earl didn't show up. No contact. When MSP accessed old highway monitoring data, they discovered Earl's fuel card had been scanned at a gas station 30 miles from the Ottawa cabin that very afternoon. on the day Amber vanished. This sent a chill through Galvez. He exclaimed in the meeting room. He took Amber that same day, not a week later, not a month later. The day Amber disappeared, he left Alpena and headed straight to Ottawa National Forest. Earl Garland's suspicious past. Digging deeper into Earl's criminal records, MSP uncovered a pattern of violent behavior and child harassment from the 1950s, but never enough evidence for prosecution. 1958, accused of stalking children after school in Ohio, no evidence. 1961, investigated for unauthorized child detention after an 8-year-old girl went missing for 3 hours at a fair. The girl was found safe. Earl denied it. 1963, suspected in the brief disappearance of a boy in Wisconsin. No proof. 1965, suddenly left Ohio for Michigan without notifying relatives. 1967, recorded living near Ottawa, purchasing the cabin through an unofficial transaction. A genealogy investigator stated bluntly, "He's the type who appears on the edges of disappearances, but always vanishes before investigation." Looking back at each point, Emma began connecting the dots. Cabin 14 belonged to Earl after 1967. Mary Garland had memories of living in this cabin as a child. The frightened blonde-haired girl in the Polaroid was very likely Mary. Amber was present in the cabin, proven by the library card and exercise notebook. The only thing missing was motive. But Earl's 30-year history showed he didn't need a traditional motive. He abducted children because he craved control. He moved constantly to avoid detection, and he changed holding locations to erase traces. Mary Garland, Earl's second victim. When cross-referencing the time Mary appeared in Arizona in 1976, with a new name, reissued birth certificate, no prior records, the investigation team concluded that Mary was most likely taken by Earl when he left Michigan after 1970. This fit the facts. Mary remembered the cabin, remembered the forest, remembered the man's footsteps, and remembered a brown-haired girl who cried a lot. Amber. Mary's DNA matched the Collins maternal line, but not directly with Amber. Mary was a distant relative, not directly tied to Amber's disappearance, but the only living person who had been in the cabin with Amber. Earl likely chose Mary because she was younger, easier to control, and could be moved without drawing attention. Amber was older, could resist more, forcing him to hold her longer, or worse. Earl Garland died in 1998, taking his secrets to the grave. When the cold case unit tracked Earl's last known residence, they discovered he had died in 1998 from heart failure, a quiet death in a small town in New Mexico. No one knew his past. No one knew about the Michigan cabin. No one knew he had taken 2 children into the Ottawa forest. A veteran MSP officer looked at the file and said, "He died before anyone could ask a single question." Earl's only possessions at death were an old trunk with a few simple items, but nothing linked to Amber. He lived alone, no family, no bank accounts, no legal papers beyond a driver's license. His name never appeared in any official housing registrations since the 1970s. Earl had lived like a ghost for nearly half his life, and died like a ghost, before anyone knew that ghost had stolen Amber Collins's childhood. The official conclusion of the Cold Case Unit in December 2023, the Michigan Cold Case Unit issued its internal conclusion. 1. Earl Garland purchased cabin 14 in 1967. 2. Earl was in the Alpena area on the day Amber disappeared. 3. Genealogical DNA confirms Mary Garland, a victim living under a hidden identity, belongs to the same branch as the Collins maternal line. 4. Physical evidence at the cabin shows Amber lived there after her disappearance. 5. Earl's historical data fits the pattern of a mobile child abductor. The case was officially noted. Suspect Earl Garland, deceased. Hung Thad, Earl Garland, a Jachet. Not a single day did he face justice. Not a single voice of the children he took was ever heard in his lifetime. Not a single confession was recorded. Earl left the world before the truth could catch up, but the Michigan State Police knew one crucial part of the case was still missing. Amber lived in the cabin. How long did she survive? Was she killed or taken elsewhere? And what happened to the blonde-haired girl, Mary, after leaving the cabin? Those questions would lead them into the darkest, most painful, but also the final part of the Amber Collins case. When the conclusion about Earl Garland was reached, the entire cold case unit understood that the most critical question remained unanswered. Did Amber Collins end her life in the Ottawa cabin, or did she survive, taken elsewhere, and possibly living under a different identity? A question that seemed impossible, until the final DNA analysis results returned from the lab in January 2024. The results left the entire team silent for several minutes. No cheers of joy, no sighs of relief, just heavy silence, the kind that falls when people face a truth too vast to put into words. The results stated clearly: 1. The DNA profile from the 1969 hair strand matched 97.4% with Mary Garland's mitochondrial DNA. 2. Mary Garland and the hair strand belonged to the same direct maternal line. 3. When compared to the Collins family DNA, Mary Garland matched 99.8% with the mitochondrial DNA of Amber's mother, Elaine Collins. There was no room for doubt anymore. No more distant relative. No more possible witness. The DNA results revealed only one truth: Mary Garland was Amber Collins, the 11-year-old child who vanished in 1969, the child who wrote in the notebook "I want to go home," the child who appeared in the Ottawa cabin in the Polaroid photos, had survived, grown up, taken a new identity, and never knew she was the victim. Michigan had searched for over 54 years. Why did Amber become Mary? When Mary heard the news, she collapsed into her chair, hands trembling violently. She exclaimed through choked sobs, "So, I was the child who was taken. I am Amber." Emma Ridley could only nod, her throat nearly closed with emotion. The story was gradually reconstructed. Amber was abducted by Earl on that summer morning in 1969. He took her to the Ottawa cabin, where he had held other children before. Some time later, Earl moved Amber, but took along a younger child, the blonde-haired girl in the Polaroid. That blonde-haired child was another victim, possibly abducted before Amber, but whose identity remains unknown. Earl left Michigan in the early 1970s, taking Amber with him, renaming her Mary, using a reissued birth certificate in Arizona to erase all traces. From then on, Amber lived as a different child, in a different life. No one traced her identity. No one raised questions. No one knew she was originally from Michigan. And Amber, now Mary Garland, never remembered the first part of her life, except for a few fragmented memories of the cabin, and a brown-haired girl who cried often, which were images of herself in the mirror. Announcing the truth, the case officially solved on February 12, 2024. The Michigan State Police held the largest press conference in the history of the state's cold case unit. Dozens of media outlets, hundreds of Alpena residents, and the remaining Collins family members were present. Lead investigator Mark Galvez announced to the entire nation, "After 54 years, we confirm that Amber Collins was not murdered as previously suspected. She was abducted, taken out of Michigan, given a new identity, and lived under the name Mary Garland." The sound in the press room fell into a vacuum. Some people burst into tears. Some were stunned. Some could not believe that the girl they thought had died in 1969 was living as an ordinary woman in Arizona. This was not a case of body found, not a case that ended with a funeral, not a case of despair or tragedy. This was one of the rarest cases in U.S. history where a victim missing for over half a century was found alive. Under the camera lights, Galvez delivered the concluding statement that shook the nation: "Amber Collins has come home." But what about the other children? As the country celebrated, the cold case unit had to face another truth, a darker one. In the Ottawa cabin, there were Polaroids of 2 children. Only one had been found. The blonde-haired girl, about 7 years old, in the Polaroid had never been identified. Earl Garland had moved through multiple states: Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, New Mexico, Arizona. In each of those states, there were unexplained child disappearances. The MSP director stated clearly in the final report on the Amber case, "Earl Garland was not just Amber's abductor, we believe he may have been a serial abductor, an unidentified repeat offender." And so, while the Amber Collins case was resolved, a new investigation began. The identity of the blonde-haired girl in the photo, other cabins Earl may have used, children who vanished in the states Earl passed through, and whether any other victims survived like Amber. The Cold Case Unit officially opened a new file, Earl Garland Victim Identification Project, for Amber, a journey beginning from erased memories when Mary, now knowing she was Amber, returned to Michigan. She was welcomed by the Collins family with trembling arms, tears, and joy that was both beautiful and painful. She did not remember them. She did not remember the old house. She did not remember her life before age 11. But the Collins family said one sentence that newspapers across America published: "It's okay. We'll tell you everything one by one. You survived. That's the most important thing." 54 years Amber Collins was missing from the world. 54 years, everyone thought she was dead. 54 years, the truth was hidden in the cabin, in memories, in lost files. And finally, in 2024, the truth rose from the ground like a sprout from a long winter. Amber Collins never died. She lived, as Mary Garland, and now her real name had returned to the world. The case was closed, but the story had only just begun. When the Michigan State Police officially closed the Amber Collins file, in March 2024, something unexpected happened. The case was immediately incorporated into training programs at police academies, investigative schools, and criminal justice research centers across the country. Not because it was the longest-running disappearance, nor because it marked the unprecedented reappearance of a victim after more than half a century, but because the case had become the model case study on the value of perseverance, the importance of evidence preservation, and the power of forensic DNA in the new century. When the FBI hosted a seminar on forensic breakthroughs in long-term missing persons cases, photos of Amber Collins and Mary Garland were displayed side by side on the main screen. A child missing since 1969, and the woman who had lived her entire life unaware she was that very victim. The greatest lesson the case offered was summed up in one sentence: no case is truly cold if the evidence still exists. Cold cases become a national focus across the United States. In a series of seminars, experts all pointed to the same thing. If the 1969 hair strand had been discarded, as often happened in cases from that era due to lack of technology, Amber Collins would forever remain just a name on a missing children list. No one knew that genetic genealogy DNA technology would advance to the point where it could build family trees from a DNA fragment smaller than a speck of dust. And no one expected that a hair strand, unsuitable for nuclear DNA testing in the 1960s-70s, would become the key to solving the case 54 years later. The Amber Collins case became the prime example. Every piece of evidence, no matter how seemingly worthless, can still solve a case, as long as it survives long enough for science to catch up. The FBI immediately requested that states review all old evidence storage facilities, especially hair samples, fabric fibers, skin cells, and small biological traces. The Amber story was featured in a special report by the National Institute of Justice (NIJ) as the standard example to persuade the government to allocate more funding for cold case programs. The big lesson: evidence preservation is a lifeline. Veteran investigators in Michigan admitted, if the 1969 officer hadn't carefully placed the hair strand in an envelope, sealed it, dated it, and sent it to storage, the case would never have been solved. Throughout the 1980s, 90s, many police departments across the U.S. had destroyed old evidence to save space. Michigan was fortunate not to do so. Following the Amber case, the state immediately issued new regulations. All evidence related to missing children must be preserved indefinitely. Even evidence of undetermined value, even evidence collected from scenes of unclear relevance. This was a historic change. An MSP commander said, "We learned the lesson from this very case. Never underestimate any small clue, because the science of 50 years later might turn it into the most critical testimony." Genetic genealogy, the turning point in modern criminal investigation, The Amber Collins case was one of the rare instances proving that DNA genealogy can not only find perpetrators, but also locate living victims who have changed identities, lost memories, and lived in another state. Previously, forensic genealogy was mainly used for homicides, sexual assaults, suspect identification. But after this case, the FBI expanded its application to long-term disappearances, children with renamed false identities, suspected historical human trafficking, cases with no paper records before 1980. Internal reports showed that 21 new cases across the U.S. had been reopened, based on the Amber investigation model. The technique of multi-generational family tree building to identify victims was given a new official name in training materials: Collins Method. The Collins Method. Amber Collins and its societal impact, changing how America views missing children. For 54 years, America believed that a child missing for weeks was almost certainly no longer alive. The Amber case completely shattered that belief. Her story was shared on every platform. Parents learned that abducted children can live for years under false identities. Police learned never to overlook old files. Child protection organizations learned that forgotten children never truly disappear. Thousands of families with children missing from the 1960s, 90s began requesting case reopenings. Missing persons centers reported a 400% increase in tips within just 6 months. An analyst at NCME said, "Amber has brought hope to families who had none left." Michigan changes missing children investigation procedures. As soon as the case was resolved, the governor of Michigan passed a new set of rules: Next Generation Missing Children Investigation Protocol, Amber Protocol 1. Immediate forensic exploitation at the scene. No 24-hour wait. 2. Collect DNA to 2024 standards, even if evidence relevance is uncertain. 3. Automatically enter cases into genealogical tracing systems after 6 months if unsolved. 4. Mandatory federal and local coordination within the first 72 hours. 5. Indefinite evidence storage. This protocol was named in honor of the girl who returned after half a century. Amber Protocol. The Amber Protocol. And starting in 2025, this protocol was officially implemented across all 83 counties in Michigan. At the end of the 54-year journey, the Amber Collins case was not just a miraculous reunion between a woman and her true identity. It was also a wake-up call for the nation's investigative system. Amber became proof that cold cases never truly die. Old evidence is never useless. Science never stops unlocking doors thought permanently sealed, and a child robbed of her childhood can still reclaim her name, even after half a century. From here, America entered a new era in missing children investigations, an era written by the story of Amber Collins herself, the child who returned from the shadows of history. The story of Amber Collins, 11-year-old girl abducted in 1969 and found alive only after 54 years under the identity of Mary Garland, is not just a reminder of the power of science and perseverance, but also a reflection of the fears, challenges, and responsibilities that American society faces today. The fact that Amber was taken from Alpena, held anonymously in the Ottawa cabin, and grew up without knowing who she was, shows that dangers to children are not just in movies. They can happen in any community, whether a small northern Michigan town or a quiet neighborhood in Arizona. From seemingly worthless evidence like a hair strand, an exercise notebook, or a forgotten library card in the cabin, we learn that every detail matters, and this applies perfectly to modern life. Attention to detail, in families, workplaces, communities, can make the difference between safety and tragedy. The story also emphasizes the importance of community connection. If witnesses in Alpena in 1969 had reported more boldly, if unusual signs around the cabin had not been overlooked, Amber might have been found sooner. This reflects today's American culture, where every citizen has a responsibility to report anything unusual they see, no matter how small. In a vast and diverse society, community vigilance is the first line of defense for children and the vulnerable. Finally, The greatest lesson from the Amber case is the belief that it is never too late to find the truth. Whether a family searching for a loved one, a community seeking justice, or an individual seeking their own identity, that journey is always worthwhile. And just as Amber reclaimed her real name after 54 years, every American today can reclaim hope, even from the deepest darkness. Thank you for joining us on the 54-year journey of Amber Collins. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next cold cases. See you in the next video, where we continue opening the doors to truths that time once tried to hide.